Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Hobart, and I'm the chairman of the World Affairs Council here in Orange County in Southern California. And I'd like to welcome everybody today to our special event this afternoon, Challenges of Leadership in Our Democracy with Secretary Panetta. Before we get rolling, I do want to thank the participation of quite a few different councils we have from around the country today. So there are different logos are up on the screen, as well as our new friends down in San Diego, the San Diego Diplomacy Council. We're thrilled and thankful to have all of you involved. And these types of events are really what the council is all about, to try to bring nonpartisan events to the local community with top experts from around the world. And we're thrilled to be able to have Secretary Panetta with us today. Before I hand it off to our moderator, I'd like to really quickly kind of go over the format. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, we will have our conversation. And as that conversation is going along, if you have questions that pop to mind, feel free to go down to the bottom of your screen and the Q&A button. You can click on that and type in questions. And those questions will then be funneled to me. And I will come back towards the end and be able to do a little bit of the audience Q&A portion before we close. Now I'd like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Richard Downey. He's a dear friend of our council. In fact, he's on our executive board, and we're very thankful to have him here today. He's a retired Army colonel with 35 years of experience leading military, civilian, and private sector organizations. And that includes a 9-year stint as the director of the William J. Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. Dr. Downey, thank you for joining us, and I will hand it off to you.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be able to moderate this session because it's such an honor to have Secretary Panetta with us. For those of you, I'm sure all of you know, Secretary Panetta, Leon Panetta, is one of those people that needs no introduction. But I told him earlier that, Henry Kissinger once said that those who need no introduction crave it the most. And but he said, all right, just give a few highlights of my introduction. But I really encourage you to take a look at Secretary Panetta's full biography. It's a remarkable career of public service. He started, in the Army. I'm very proud as a former Army guy. I'm proud to have him there for that. Spent 16 years in Congress. Has been the director of the Office of Management and Budget. He was the chief of staff to President Clinton, and during the Obama administration served as the head of the CIA, director of the CIA, as well as Secretary of Defense. And he's founded and has directed the Panetta Institute for Public Policy. So we are just thrilled to have you here with us today, sir. And let me just say, there's many World Affairs Councils and other organizations that are on this call, but I just want to say, I know on behalf of all of us, certainly in Orange County and those of us from California, we take special pride that someone who has been born and raised in California and Monterey has done so much for our country, to serve our country. And thank you, sir, so much for your service. But it's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's really an honor to have this opportunity. As you said, I was born and raised in California, and our home is here on the Monterey Peninsula. I'm really happy to be able to participate in this forum with a distinguished group from the Orange County World Affairs Council. I've spoken to a lot of World Affairs Councils, and I always find it to be really rewarding in terms of people's yearning to try to figure out what's going on in the world and what we can do to try to make sure the United States is a world leader.
Oh, thanks, sir. And again, we're delighted to have so many different councils from around the country here on this, joining us on this session. And sir, I had a list of questions that I wanted to ask you, but there are so many things going on so quickly, I have had to rechange that several times. So what I'd like to do, though, is start off with something that I know you would add some special insight to. The state of Vladimir Putin's mind in terms of, there's a lot of people who said he's erratic, he's angry, and he may not be stable. So I know, especially during your term as the director of the CIA and as a Secretary of Defense, I'm sure you spent some time looking at Putin's character and his state of mind. What have you been surprised at what has been happening? Is he a rational actor in this this lead up to the invasion and since the invasion?
Well, the basic book on Putin begins with the fact that he's KGB, KGB, KGB. That's the way he was raised. He was raised and worked as an intelligence agent, and he really has that mindset, which in part carries a little paranoia about what's going on and who's after him and who's after Russia. But it also, there's a certain pragmatism that he has with regards to, just exactly what is it that he's trying to achieve and what is it that he's trying to defend against. It's very clear that this is a person who has a very set group of views with regards to Russia and the role of Russia. He has a very set group of ideas about the United States. Putin's basic interest has always been to undermine the United States of America. And in line with that, obviously in recent years, to try to restore the former Soviet Union. Those are kind of two driving forces that Putin focuses on. He's a bully. He is somebody who is willing to use power. That's the story of Putin. Is Putin always ultimately uses power for his purposes. In the last, I think almost 4 American administrations, he's viewed weakness on the part of the United States. And because of that, he moved into Georgia, he moved into the Crimea, he moved into Syria, he moved into Libya, and he conducted a very bold cyber attack against the United States of America in terms of our election institutions, something they're continuing to do. And he really didn't have to pay a price. He didn't have to pay a price. And I think when he saw what, the kind of polarization and divisions within our country, the dysfunction within our country, the political dysfunction, and then add to that what happened in Afghanistan, I think he really felt that the United States was in a weakened position. And I pretty much believe that that's what drove him ultimately to go ahead with this invasion. Having said that, it's pretty clear that this invasion is not going according to plan, and that it's bogged down for a lot of reasons. One is, this is, as you can appreciate, you get a lot of great intelligence as the result of Russia now going to war, and they are not as well organized as we thought they would be. They're not as coordinated. They don't have good leadership qualities. Most of these people are conscription soldiers who are conscripted for a year of service, by the way. So there's not a hell of a lot of training that's provided these soldiers. But at the same time, they really didn't implement any kind of really coordinated plan to invade. And I think Putin pretty much figured that he would be able to invade and within a few days take down the capital and have the government fall. That hasn't happened, largely because he's confronted a very effective force in the Ukrainians who are fighting for their country. And so the combination now of sanctions, of the kind of weapons that we're providing the Ukrainians, plus the reinforcement of our NATO positions, has really squeezed Putin. And he, without question, is somebody who's who's in a corner right now. Yesterday, I had the chance to talk with my successor at the CIA, and Bill Burns, and Bill has had a lot of experience with Putin. He dealt with him as ambassador in Moscow, and he thinks that ultimately Putin will double down and keep pushing, and I suspect that's right. I don't believe that some people say he's kind of lost his mind and we just don't know. I don't think so. I think he's very intent on trying to win his objectives. That's what he cares about right now. But I do believe that he's not winning that war, and that with what's happening in Russia, with the concerns of the Russian people about this war, and what's happening to their economy, combined to what's happening to Russians who are getting killed on the battlefield in Ukraine, I think that could very well put him in a position where he's going to have to decide, is there a way I can get out of this? Or am I going to have to take even further steps? That's the danger point that we're in right now, and I can't give you the answer to that question.
Well, thank you, sir. Actually, you touched on a number of things that I want to follow up on. But the performance of the Russian military really, as you mentioned, I think they certainly prepared for a quick invasion to perhaps install a puppet government that would be favorable to Putin. And we've seen these logistical problems. We've seen the lack of coordination between the ground forces and their air force, their air support and fire support, the lack of ability to gain air superiority. Did that surprise you that the performance of the Russian forces has been so poor, essentially?
It has. Having served as Secretary of Defense, and we, as you know, we do a hell of a lot of planning for every contingency, and we planned for the possibility that we might have to confront the Russian army, in that context, you have certain details that you get from intelligence, as well as from our ability to get the kind of information that's critical to understanding their security. I understand, they operate kind of on a different book than the men and women in uniform in this country. What we saw them do in Syria was, the kind of devastating approach to wiping out cities and towns in Syria. We knew that was something that Russians were capable of doing. We thought that with their weaponry, with the tanks they have, with their sophisticated weapons, that they would be able to at least get trained on how to use those weapons effectively. And that when you put 200,000 people on the border, that you put them there with a mission, a very clear mission that has to be achieved. And it's also, as you know, has to be based on good intelligence as to what are you going to confront. And for whatever reason, I think they really overestimated their ability to be able to go in. They've been delayed. The Ukrainians are, as we've seen, great fighters. It's that whole issue of, you have an invading force that's a little bit ambivalent about whether they're going to invade, a country that they consider part of Russia, and have a close relationship to Ukraine. So they're a little bit ambivalent versus, a group of fighters who are fighting for their life, fighting for their country, fighting for their democracy. And you put those two ingredients together, I'll always put my money on the fighter who is fighting the good fight because he is committed to that fight. And that's showing right now. So I think they have shown some clear weaknesses. It doesn't mean they don't have overwhelming force. Everybody feels that eventually they're going to get their act together. I keep waiting for that to happen. But I think because of the number of troops that they can deploy and the weapon systems that they can put into action here, that ultimately they're going to be able to win some additional cities. But I also do not believe that they can conquer Ukraine. Yeah, they can wipe out the cities. They can kill innocent men, women, and children, but they cannot kill the hearts and minds of Ukrainians who are committed to defending their country and believe in what their country's all about. So, yeah, are they going to be able to ultimately bring that government down? They could, but they're going to face a resistance movement that is going to be there. Mark my words, there will be a very effective resistance movement, and I don't think the Russians are capable to put enough troops into Ukraine to be able to control that kind of resistance movement. And so that's going to be that's probably where we're headed here, is a very prolonged resistance movement that's going to take a while to play out.
Well, hopefully, sir, it doesn't come to that just yet. And one of those things that may at least prolong the situation before Russia does take over is support. The support that we're giving to the Ukrainians to be able to fight the Russian forces and do as well as you mentioned that they've been doing. They have been fighting ferociously, and it is their land and they're tough. But in fact, about an hour ago, I saw a report that we've been trying to get Poland to give up some MiG-29s to the Ukrainians because the Ukrainian pilots know how to fly those aircraft. And I saw about an hour ago a report that said that the Poles have agreed to send those aircraft. They're sending them to Germany, and then we'll get those to the Ukrainians in some way. But in fact, we've noticed the Germans. They've changed their ban on giving weapons that's been in place for decades. We're trying to get supplies from other countries as well. The U.S. is also toying with the idea of giving intelligence to the Ukrainians, and I'm wondering, all of these things we're certainly supporting the Ukrainians. But is Russia and Putin, are they going to paint these actions to assist the Ukraine in such a strong way as a declaration of war? I mean, he's already said it about sanctions, but yeah. If he says, okay, you guys are, the West, the United States, NATO, you are now declaring war against me, what kind of actions do you think he could or would take to respond to the kind of support we're giving to Ukraine?
Well, let me begin with the primary point, which is that the purpose here is to stop Putin, to stop this tyrant from what he's trying to do in invading a sovereign democracy, Ukraine. And the United States and our allies in NATO have shown remarkable unity in coming together on a set of strategies to try to make Putin pay a price. And so, we've obviously implemented some pretty effective sanctions here, largely because all of these countries have implemented sanctions, and that's the best way to squeeze their economy, is to have everybody joining. The president obviously taking additional steps today. Secondly, we have provided weapons to them. We've given them close to 20,000 javelins, and add to that stingers, add to that other ammo and other capabilities. They've gotten some, and those weapons and military aid are being delivered very rapidly now, which is a good thing. So we are arming them. And by the way, I think it is a good thing to be able to give them the additional MiGs that they need in order to be able to use them not only to protect their airspace, but to go after targets.
Yeah.
You and I, when you see a 40-mile convoy, in my mind, that's one hell of a target. And I'm sure they're going to be able to do that. So, yes, I think what we are doing with, we obviously are trying to avoid some kind of direct confrontation with Russia. I understand that. But make no mistake about it. In many ways, we're involved in a proxy war against Putin. That's what we're doing. We're providing arms. We're providing support. We're sanctioning the hell out of him. We are making him pay a price. And yeah, is Putin, are we worried that Putin may take additional steps? He may. But as you know, the fundamental mission here is to do everything we can to protect the Ukraine. That's the fundamental mission, because that represents a democracy. And the last damn thing we want is to have another tyrant, after what we learned in World War II, be successful at not only going after this democracy, but then taking advantage of that opportunity to go after others. We have got to stop him now. And are there risks involved? Yes, there are. But is this a worthy fight? You bet it is.
Sir, you make a really interesting point about the fact that this is a proxy war against Putin. And I think it raises the question about what President Zelensky has been asking or pleading for, essentially, which is the no-fly zone, which would put, he's asked for this, and in his place, I certainly understand why he would do it. But that puts US and NATO aircraft in direct conflict. We'd have to take down Russian aircraft, and would also put US and NATO aircraft at risk of air defense, some really good air defense equipment from the Russians, the S-300, the S-400, which, by the way, could be, has the range to cover most of Ukraine from outside of Ukraine, from Russia and probably Belarus. Now, is this something, is the no-fly zone something given your thoughts on really stopping Putin, is this something we ought to be doing, or are there other things that we could do? Because it certainly does risk escalation to a U.S. NATO conflict directly with Russia.
Well, my sense is that this is the reason we should provide those additional MiGs to Ukrainians. They're good fighter plane pilots. They know what they're doing, and they're very good at their job. And I think giving them, something like 26 additional MiGs is going to be really helpful to them, having a greater capability with regards to protecting their airspace. Now, from my point of view, the principal mission that we have right now is to provide and continue to provide weapons to the Ukrainians so that they can continue the good fight. And so far, we've been able to get those weapon systems to them. I don't think there's a need to do a no-fly zone now because of all of the risks involved. But as somebody who's been in the military and at the Pentagon, I don't like to take things off the table, in the sense that if we faced a situation where the only way we could provide the weapons and arms that they need is to create a corridor of some kind, which would allow us to do airlift, then I think we ought to at least have that option on the table to be considered if that's needed. Mm-hmm. But right now, I don't see the need to actually go ahead and implement a full-scale no-fly zone.
Actually, that's a very interesting way to kind of parse that issue. As you mentioned, perhaps not an entire no-fly zone over Ukraine, but just a no-fly zone along the corridor that will allow us to provide that support to Ukraine. That's a really interesting option. I think that I'm sure is being considered, but that's not something that's been talked about in the press. But I think that's a really great option. Thank you. You also mentioned sanctions, and of course, earlier today, just a couple of hours ago, President Biden mentioned that we were going to ban U.S. Imports of oil from Russia. And by the way, I noticed your son, Congressman Jimmy Panetta, co-sponsored a bill to do exactly that, which was kind of interesting. But along with that, I mean, we've here in California, for those of you who are in Santa Fe or Cleveland or other places on this call, your gas prices are high, but here in California, it's really high. In fact, I was listening in the morning to a radio program, and the announcer was saying, yeah, he heard another program this morning and said, yeah, the average is up to $4.50 a gallon. And he said, wow, where is that? Let me go. So because ours is really high right now. But what the Biden administration is trying to do, they've already been talking, for example, with the Maduro administration in Venezuela. And most of you know, the Maduro administration for having fraud on elections and so forth has been sanctioned for several years now, their oil, and they're very close with Russia. They are, they've been buying massive amounts of weapons from Russia. They have Russian advisors in Venezuela, and they've had a very close relationship. So there's also been talk about going to Iran to buy their oil. So clearly, I understand President Biden's effort to want to bring down the price at the pumps of gas. But is it a good idea to be reaching out to authoritarian leaders like Venezuela and possibly Iran?
Well, as you know, we've been trying to understand the oil market for a long time. But the reality is that these countries all throw their oil into a big pot, and then the market kind of distributes that pot around the world. And there are a lot of countries that feed into that market. And look, I think it is important that when we are confronting Putin the way we are with all of these sanctions and with all of these efforts to try to strangle their economy, the Russian economy, that it's a little incongruous to be buying their oil at the same time and giving them the benefit of that kind of economic help. So I think it makes sense to cut off that supply of oil from Russia. And I think that it also is important for the administration to look at as many other possible sources as possible to be able to fill that whatever gap that is. I think, it's a gap. It's not that big a gap when you consider, the total volume of what we depend on. And also our own resources ought to be developed as well in order to be able to make sure we have that protection for the future. So I think it's a combination of, I think look at possible sources. I wouldn't put a lot of, dependence on Venezuela or Iran, but on the other hand, if they're willing to provide some additional oil, I wouldn't just out of hand reject that because right now I think it is really important for the United States, although, look, when we're engaged in a war, and we are, whether we call it that or not, the fact is that Americans understand that there's a sacrifice that's associated with that. We're in a battle to try to defend a democracy. Why? Because we want to make sure we defend our own democracy. And is that going to come at a price? Yes. But I think all of us have to be willing to be able to pull together to make sure that that we continue this effort to stop Putin and to stop what he's doing in Ukraine. So I think the administration can find ways to be able to soften the blow here with regards to gas prices. I'm with you and your friend, because when I saw that the price was $4.50, I look at the gas station prices here on the Monterey Peninsula, and they're now well over $6. So
Crazy. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I'd love to get some gas for $4.50. I was just, my gosh, that'd be great. Sir, we've talked a lot about Ukraine, and it impacts other parts of the world as well. And I know, by the way, I'm trying to watch the time here. I know there's a lot of questions from our audience. And by the way, those of you in the audience, if you have questions for Secretary Panetta, please put those in the Q&A there. We'll get to those. Jeff Hobart will be back to do those questions. But if I may, sir, just take a few other glances off of Ukraine, because I think, in China is looking at the Ukraine situation as well. But last year, President Xi Jinping of China mentioned that it was a priority that reunification of Taiwan with China must be fulfilled. And so we've seen the pressure that China has put on Hong Kong. We've seen all of these sort of pressure tactics in the Taiwan Straits. There, they've used aircraft into the Taiwan air defense zone, many large incursions into that area. And I'm wondering, on one hand, President Xi, like President Putin, may have been surprised at the unity that NATO and Western countries have joined together in terms of confronting this Russian incursion into Ukraine. But on the other hand, in China, for China in the Asia, there's no real equivalent to NATO. There's no alliance, the security alliance that would kind of band together in the case of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. Now, what do you think this unity, though, in the West has changed China's calculus about whether and when to do an attack on Taiwan?
Well, let me begin by kind of reflecting on the fact that prior to the war in Ukraine, I think the United States was facing a very dangerous world with a lot of flashpoints, probably more flashpoints than we've seen since World War II. I mean, we were dealing obviously with a new chapter of the Cold War and dealing with Russia. We're dealing with China and their effort to, as Xi himself has said, to replace the United States as world leader. We're dealing with North Korea and their development of nuclear weapons and missile capabilities. Iran, their effort to develop nuclear weapons and missile capabilities. We're dealing with a Middle East in which there are a lot of failed states that provide a breeding ground for terrorism, which we're still confronting in the world. Add to that cyber. There are a lot of flashpoints. And I think it was critical for the United States and our NATO allies to say to Putin that if he invades Ukraine, he will pay a price. And that's exactly what we're doing. And the message we sent to Putin is the same message that we need to send to China, to North Korea, to Iran, and to other tyrants in the world. And with regards to China, I don't think there's any question that Xi is looking at what's happening to Russia right now. And that's the last thing he wants to have happen to China. Xi is, has developed an economic plan to advance China's interests, both at home and abroad. The last thing he wants is to be strangled and to have his economy strangled through a set of sanctions. Now, in addressing China, I think the United States does need to build our allies in that part of the world. We have the Quad with Australia and India, Japan, South Korea, the Asean countries. I think we ought to be building a NATO-type alliance in the Pacific that is built around security, not just trade, but on security. Because the one thing about Russia and about China, even though they may have each other, they don't have a lot of allies in the world. They really don't. They don't believe in building alliances. They want to take advantage of countries, but they don't believe in alliances. And the strongest thing going for the United States and other democracies in the world is to build strong alliances that can take unified positions, so that when we say to China, look, do not go into Taiwan, do not take advantage of your position in South China Sea with these islands that are being militarized, that we have some muscle behind that. And once you draw that line with China, you can negotiate from strength rather than weakness. And ultimately, I think we can engage in a dialogue with Xi about where we're going. Ultimately, look, this is a global world, for God's sakes. This is a global world. And it is to our advantage to try to build a better world in the 21st century that believes in peace and prosperity. What we're seeing happen in Ukraine is not only dangerous, it is dangerous, but it's a pivotal moment. It's a pivotal moment. And what we do there will say a lot about what happens in the 21st century in terms of how democracies can really unify to build a better world. That's what's at stake here.
So let me just follow up a little bit on that, just for everybody's information, because Secretary Panetta mentioned ASEAN. That's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and it is a trade bloc, not a security alliance like we know as NATO. And so I think what you're saying, sir, is that perhaps this is given what's going on in Ukraine, this might be an auspicious time for the United States or another country to start to build that security alliance in. Right. Would you encourage President Biden to start that now? I mean, to take advantage of this moment.
I would encourage that kind of alliance in the Asian arena. I would encourage that kind of alliance in the Middle East. I think our ability to build an alliance of moderate Arab nations, Israel, to confront both Iran and terrorism would really put us at a strong advantage to confront both of those threats. And I think the same thing is true for Latin and Central America and for Africa, for that matter. It is our ability to unify with our allies to confront those autocracies and tyrants that is going to define, whether or not the 21st century is going to be a century of peace and prosperity. Look, I look at the 20th century, and I think in many ways what happened in World War I kind of defined where we were going in the 20th century. And I think this is a moment in 2022 where we could really define what the 21st century is going to look like. And so that's why it is so important that we stay unified, that we stay strong, and that we do everything necessary to make sure that Putin ultimately is defeated here.
Sir, by the way, it sounds like there's a great op-ed or article coming from the Panetta Institute for Public Policy on this strike now while the iron is hot to start getting these security alliances. I mean, it sounds like a great idea. It really does. And I want to ask you, before we go to audience questions, because I know people are champing at the bit to get their questions answered by you. But I want to ask you one more, and on Iran. And, you know, we had the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal from 2015 during the Obama administration. And the Trump administration went away with that because of the issues that it was going to sunset, the terms of that allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon at some point. It didn't address missiles. It didn't address the terrorism or support for terrorist groups that the Iranians are doing. But right now, the Biden administration is really working hard to revive that agreement in some form. Is that a good idea? Is that what's your thoughts on the possibility of getting that agreement and whether it is a really good idea for the future?
Well, I think the reality right now is that it isn't going anywhere because Russia, as one of the allies involved in that agreement, has said very clearly that unless we lift the sanctions on Russia, they're not going to agree to any lifting of sanctions with regards to Iran, et cetera. So I don't think it's going anywhere. But having said that, look, I didn't agree with all the elements of the nuclear agreement with Iran either. But in the very least, it did put a lid on their ability to enrich nuclear fuel, even though it was temporary. A temporary halt was better than no halt at all. And they were abiding by it. So I regret that Trump decided to pull out of that agreement because I think we would have at least had the opportunity to then be able to go after other areas like missiles, support for terrorism, et cetera. So I thought that the Biden administration tried to do the right thing, was to see if we could put Iran back in the box, particularly with regards to nuclear enrichment, because they have continued now to enrich fuel. They're probably very close to the ability to have enough fuel for a nuclear weapon. That's a reality. So it is not a good story right now in terms of what's happening in Iran. But I don't see how, under the present circumstances, that this effort is going to be very successful.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. So this has been a fascinating discussion, and it's going to get even more fascinating as we open this up for questions from the audience. So I thank you so much for this part up to this point. I'm going to pass this over to Jeff for questions, and before we get back to closing this out. So Jeff, please, I know you got a lot of questions to field.
That I do. Thank you, Dr. Downey. So quite a few questions, and encourage everybody to continue throwing them our way as we have the last 15 minutes or so here of our program. The first question, to kind of continue our focus on Russia for a bit, kind of taps into your experience in the CIA. What in your opinion, is there a chance that that the Russian people actually will rise up effectively?
Prior to what's happening in Ukraine, I would have said that was a real stretch to think that the Russian people would rise up against Putin. But based on what I'm seeing now, and based on the fact that Russians are actually taking to the streets to protest what's happening in Ukraine, and they've developed this symbol Z, which they're now displaying around the country as their anti-war symbol. And add to that the fact that the Russians are getting strangled by virtue of an economy that is being squeezed very hard and impacting on their economy, impacting on their ability to buy things, impacting on their survival. And add to that the fact that I do not believe the Russians ever really thought that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. I really don't. I think they were surprised by the fact that he decided to move into Ukraine. And, you put those ingredients together. At the same time, you combine that with Russia's failures in Ukraine to achieve some of these goals that they were after, plus the body count that's going on. I think the estimate now is that somewhere around 4,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in this battle. I think those are the ingredients of a lot of protest in Russia. And Putin has to be thinking. I mean, ultimately, you want to get to Putin, go after his political support in Russia, because that's his lifeline. And if he loses that lifeline, he loses his position as leader of Russia. So I think the very fact that that pressure is there is making Putin think twice about where he's going with this war.
Interesting. Kind of building on that a bit, do you see, in your opinion, some potential at this stage face-saving options that Putin might have? I'm quoting directly off of that. I don't know if
I
I
understand
those words, but that would allow him to exit in a way and maintain his leadership role.
I've described what I think are possibly two options right now. There are obviously a lot of other possibilities, but two possible options right now are that at some point, as the Russians are able to capture some cities and the government goes into exile in Ukraine, that Putin says, I've achieved my mission. I've made clear that we're going to do everything we can to protect our security in Russia, that we intend to really make clear to the former republics of the Soviet Union that they have to be concerned about the relationship with Russia, and in a way tries to declare victory. What does that mean? Probably means he tries to hold on to the areas that, Crimea, as well as some of the other areas that he's achieved, and that they split Ukraine, probably along the river there that goes right down the length of Ukraine. Now, having said that, I think the world will look at that as Russia and Putin being defeated. I don't know that Putin is a good enough salesman to make that case, but it is possible. It is one option that Putin could ultimately take here to avoid what otherwise is going to be a total disaster. Yeah. Which takes me to the second option, which is that there is a bloody resistance movement that develops, and it will. Mark my words. The Ukrainians are not going to be subjected to Russia, particularly now after what's happened there. And they are going to continue to fight. And they've shown the ability to have small units being able to disrupt these Russian forces. That's going to continue to happen. And the Russians don't have enough troops to send to Ukraine to try to control that country totally. They just don't have it. So it's going to turn into another version of Afghanistan for the Russians. They're going to lose a lot of Russian troops. It's going to be a bloody, long resistance movement that ultimately, I think, will result in Russia, saying we're getting out. The problem with that is it's going to take much longer. The United States will be continuing to provide arms to those that are putting up the resistance. I think we have a responsibility to do that. But as that war continues, it again raises the possibility that Putin might try to do something more that could really result in World War III.
So we've had a number of questions coming in on cyber. I think back a couple of years ago to the SolarWinds hack and the acknowledgement by our government of the extent to which there's infiltration both in our government and our private corporations. Given your background on the CIA side again, where do you see this going, and what do you see some tactics that potentially both Putin could do and us potentially as well?
Now, I've been saying for a long time, since I was director of the CIA, that cyber is the battlefield of the future. And it is. It is. It's very much the battlefield of the present. Every military plan we had at the Pentagon usually includes a cyber element because it is critical to our ability to take down communications, take down infrastructure, take down command and control. And other countries are obviously using cyber as well. We've seen the consequences of that, not only in the election cycle, but we've seen it with these ransomware attacks. There's a ransomware attack going on every 13 seconds, for goodness sakes, which tells you a lot about how cyber is being used. So what happens in this situation? For all I know, we may be already engaging in some tit for tat. Russia certainly has the ability, as we saw, to take down a pipeline in this country, our infrastructure. And whether or not he's tried to do that in terms of infrastructure, I don't know. But the United States has made clear that we will respond if that's the case. I would not be surprised if we're using some cyber in order to screw up some of their command and control now. And also to use cyber to undermine their economy even further. So cyber is this weapon that is there. It's being used. One thing I have to tell you is we have yet to define what constitutes an act of war as a result of cyber. We've never really even taken the time, frankly, to debate that issue, and we should. Because I can imagine a cyber attack that could literally cripple the United States of America, take down our electric grid, take down our financial systems, take down our government systems, our chemical systems, our water systems, because they're all run by computers. And all you need to do is deploy a very sophisticated virus to basically screw up that computer. So we're obviously engaged now in a conventional type war, let's face it. But I think in the background, cyber is playing a role. And the likelihood is that it could play an even bigger role if the conventional war for Russia continues to be bogged down.
So we have time, it looks like, for two more questions here. A lot came in on China. And historically, there's been a cautious relationship between China and Russia. And you talked a little bit earlier about alliances of the future, in a sense. Where do you see that? And where do you see the influence that how does China come into this picture right now?
Well, I've had dealings with Xi, both as director of the CIA and also as Secretary of Defense. My sense is that, as we all know, China is about China. That's their fundamental interest. China has never been about, militarily controlling the world. Although economically they would love to control the world, they are basically focused on China. And it's for that reason that even though Putin and Xi kind of made this deal, particularly with regards to the Olympics, I think Xi is looking twice at what's happened here. And he's looking at the economic impact on Russia. He sure as hell doesn't want that to happen in China. He's looking at the weaknesses of the Russian military in trying to proceed with this invasion and how a country like Ukraine has been able to effectively try to halt their advances and really halt their military plans for what they hope to achieve. And he's seeing that Putin has become a pariah in the world. She is obviously, make no mistake about it, he's obviously about power in China. But he also knows that he can't afford to become a pariah in the world if his hope is to expand China's influence in the world. And that's what he's trying to do. So I think China is thinking twice about, what they ultimately might want to do with Taiwan. I do think that any kind of what we were anticipating as a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, I don't think he's going to do that now. But I think they're going to continue to put pressure on Taiwan in the same way they put pressure on Hong Kong. That kind of approach is probably the more likely scenario when it comes to Taiwan.
Interesting. Okay, so I think I'll do one last question. I think back to when we initially connected with you several months ago. This wasn't truly even on our radar to the extent, obviously, that it is today. And kind of stepping back to the original topic of challenges of leadership in our democracy. A number of people have talked about the lack of everybody's in their silos in our country, et cetera. We were talking about a little bit about this beforehand. Given your background and years of background in Washington and Congress, just at such a wide range, can you foresee any sort of roadmap for returning to some form of bipartisanship in a sense, or is this even attainable?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical to our national security. I mean, it's incredibly important for our democracy and our ability to govern. But let me also add, it's very important to our national security to have a democracy that can govern, in which both Democrats and Republicans can work together to confront the challenges that we face. I often have said I've seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. The good news is I've seen Washington work. When I first went back to Washington, Democrats and Republicans worked together. I saw them work together on major pieces of legislation, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican president. When I was elected to Congress, Tip O'Neill was the Speaker, a Democrat's Democrat, but he had a great relationship with Bob Michel, who was the Republican minority leader. And they had their political differences, of course. They fought each other in elections. But when it came to big issues, they worked together. I mean, when Ronald Reagan was president, Democrats and Republicans passed Social Security reform, the third rail of politics. We worked together to produce a bipartisan approach to protecting Social Security. We did tax reform on a bipartisan basis. We did immigration reform on a bipartisan basis. And we did budgets on a bipartisan basis. So our country was strong as a result of that. In these last number of years, obviously, it's become very partisan, very divided, very polarized, and Washington has been dysfunctional in terms of the ability to address a lot of the issues I just talked about. I mean, I was involved with the budget. We balanced the federal budget when I was OMB director and worked in the administration. We balanced the federal budget and had a surplus. Today, we're looking at a $28 trillion national debt. And neither Republicans or Democrats are very interested in doing what they have to do in order to confront that debt. So I've told the students here at the Panetta Institute that in a democracy, we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If leadership is there and willing to take the risks associated with leadership, we can avoid crisis. But if that leadership is not there, then we will govern by crisis. And too often in recent years, we've been governing by crisis. And that undermines trust of the American people in our system of governing. So we have got to restore strong leadership in both parties. We've got to restore strong leadership that is willing to go back to Washington and put country ahead of party. That's what you have to do, which means you got to take risks. But that's the way we govern in a democracy. And I really, hope that the unity that we're seeing now between the United States and our allies in confronting Putin and Russia, that frankly, we've got to bring that kind of unity to this country so that Republicans and Democrats understand that their first responsibility is not to protecting their seat in the Congress. Their first responsibility is to protecting their country.
Wow. Well, on that, thank you, sir. Thank you for your service to our country over decades. Think back to your originally starting on the budget side and how that's evolved over the years. Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for taking the time today. I know you have a very busy schedule. I would like to again re-invite you to come on down to Southern California. From Northern Cal, it's a little bit tough to pull somebody out of the Carmel Valley and Monterey area, but we were thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to have you address our members and guests. Thank you, Dr. Downey. I appreciate you taking the time today to moderate the conversation. And of course, thank you to all of our partners around the country. We had several hundred people that were signed up today, and appreciate everybody getting the word out. Obviously, our mission now with the council, we were talking about it beforehand, to have a nonprofit, nonpartisan entity that can bring ideas, not lacking ideas, but bring ideas to the local communities here, and for us to be able to debate in a calm manner is surely valuable for all of our communities. Really quickly, I want to go over real fast the upcoming events. We actually have next Tuesday. So we just last week had former chair actually of our organization, Dr. James Coyle, come out and do a talk on Russia and Ukraine. And he actually wrote the book, Russia's Border Wars and Frozen Conflicts. And it was so well received that the National World Affairs Council of America decided to put him on a panel with our former chairman of the World Affairs Council of America, as well as the first ambassador to Ukraine, Roman Papaduk. And so that's next Tuesday afternoon at 2:00. Then at the end of March, on March 29th, we have the first time that all the California councils have come together to do an event together. And so we have Dr. Richard Haas, the president of the Council of Foreign Relations, who obviously most of you are familiar with. And he is, we're thrilled to be able to have him and to be able to have the whole state participating in a statewide event. After that, we have coming up on, we have a few more Zooms. We are getting back to in person, but we had quite a bit on the calendar. We have quite an amazing speaker coming in on April 14th. This will be another Zoom one. It is with the former Indian Foreign Secretary, Nirupana Rao. And she actually is very interesting. She was actually also the former ambassador to both China and to the US. So she'll be talking about the current crisis or ongoing crisis in the Himalaya and the kind of some of the core issues between India and China and how we were involved there as well. Then we have our next in-person event here in Southern California. We'll be with Will Hurd, former congressman and CIA operative, on April 20th. Following that, we have on May 17th, we have the recently retired commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Phil Davidson, coming here to Southern California to do actually multiple cities to do an events here in Southern California. And then at some point, we will be rescheduling former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, who we postponed for a short time due to COVID. So I do want to, again, thank everybody for attending and point out that, again, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit who over the last couple of years, we've transitioned to Zoom and we've been thrilled we've been able to bring 50 different Zoom events to our communities at a nominal cost. And just so you know, at our YouTube page, you're able to see all those old events. They're all posted up there. And I would encourage you also to go to our website, worldaffairscouncil.org. And of course, being a nonprofit, we do rely on our members and the community for support to be able to bring these speakers to you and to provide the expertise in our area. At the bottom, you have a link to one of our higher profile events that we do with the youth in our community. It's coming up this month on the 19th, and it's called Academic World Quest. And we are asking for additional donations for that event. What we do is we bring together high school students, and they have a quiz bowl of sorts. And then the winner of that actually goes out to Washington, D.C. So again, thank you, everybody. The value of our organization has never been greater than it is today. I encourage everyone to come back at a future moment and to get involved in some way or another. Again, thank you to our guests, thank you to our partners, and thank you to our speakers this afternoon. Take care.